Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to mismapasion, Juju's premium channel about all things women's football, and I've got a very exciting video for you all today. And just to start off, so you can understand the direction that I'm going for here, I am an avid player of Football Manager, and I'm very excited that FM25 is going to have its dedicated women's mode because I just really hope that based on what you learn about and what I discuss in this video with you about it pretty much comes to pass because I'd like to use it in my eventual FM25 save. Now, on today's video, it's going to be based around the FIFA report that was released about give or take 2 months ago here, and I went through that report and there were two things that really stood out to me that are related but for different reasons and how they could potentially affect the future of women's football going forward. And those two things in particular, as you can see by the title of this video, are the gold rush that is currently transpiring in Colombia and the lost generation of Canada that we're currently experiencing as well. Now, to first look at the FIFA report itself. Now, I just need to preface this entire video with some key definitions that you can understand the reasoning behind why I'm going to say certain things in this video. And the first thing we need to look at is FIFA's women's football strategy. And we are going to first look at growth participation. Now, what is growth participation? Growth participation is the endeavor to increase the level of female participation in football globally, and it's pretty much what it says on the tin. The next point that we have is enhancing the commercial value of women's football, which means to shape the new revenue streams and optimize existing ones around women's competitions and events to expand development efforts. And the final definition is build foundations, which means to create a more sophisticated women's football ecosystem whilst encouraging leadership roles for women in order to modernize the game's management. Now, particularly looking at building foundations, but to be honest, just to get all 3 points, we're going to touch on them all, especially in relation to Colombia and Canada and what they're facing respectively. And the final definition is club licensing, and that is a system that uses principles-based criteria and sets minimum standards that clubs must satisfy in order to be licensed and consequently be allowed to participate in a given competition. It aids in providing a key element in promoting the professionalization of football globally. Now, to the juicy parts, and we will start with Canada. Canada are a member association of CONCACAF, which is just the confederation of Northern American territories slash countries, as well as some Caribbean islands as well. So you've got Canada, the USA, Jamaica, Cuba, and the likes. They're all within CONCACAF. Now, CONCACAF itself has the largest proportion of female footballers participating in organized football at a rate of 42.6%, and this is mainly in large part to the USA because, as you know, women's football in the USA is a big thing, so they are definitely going to be the biggest contributors to the participation of female footballers in organized football, of course. And Canada itself, funny enough, it currently does not have its own professional league, so it's pretty much unable to provide any worthwhile addition to that 42.6% of female footballers. And this is interesting because when you look at the chart that is currently on your screen right now, Canada are currently suffering through what I call a lost generation of Canadian footballers, because as it stands right now, there are a total of 168,928 Canadian players who are no older than 20 who are currently in the system. But once they reach 20 plus, as you can see there, the number drastically goes down from 168,000 to 34,568. Now that is a huge drop off in the player participation numbers here. As you can see, for just comparison, the US does not even rank when it comes to registered female players under the age of 20, but over the age of 20 they are well in excess of both Canada and Honduras, for example, because 1.7 to 34,000 and 3,000, that is just comparing apples to oranges, I guess. But that's besides the point. So, looking at Canada, essentially what we're being told by the data here is that there are over 130,000 players who, once they reach the age of 20 and above, they decide to pretty much say goodbye to their footballing aspirations. And that could be due in large part to the lack of a local league that can pretty much provide an avenue for these players to take up football as a profession, or it could be due to so many other different reasons, but particularly that league system or the lack of a league system is what I would attribute to the large dearth of players who decide to continue playing football in Canada from the age of 20 going up. Now, to give them a little bit of credit, the Canadian Football Federation, they have plans in the pipeline to introduce a women's league in Canada by the year 2025. So currently 2 years from now, but if we're being pedantic, it's like a year and a few months from now, which is okay when it comes to addressing the problem in future. But right now there is a huge gap that needs to be addressed, and unfortunately the Canadian Federation do not have the current resources to deal with it, and pretty much we're facing a lost generation of potential top tier Canadian talent that is just going by the wayside because either they don't have the opportunity to play football locally, or they're not being picked up by bigger clubs either in the neighboring USA or just other big leagues across the world. Now, that is definitely going to be a big issue going forward for the national team, because currently the average age of the national team stands at 24.7. That's excluding the addition of Christine Sinclair, who recently announced her retirement from international football. And currently, you would say that, okay, they're 24.7, that's the average age, that's good reading. But really, if you're looking towards the future, it's not a really good thing to have, because when you're looking at the level of opposition that Canada are going to be facing at an elite level, they are going to be having one of the elderly squads in big competitions, particularly just looking at the next World Cup in 4 years' time. So currently, if we just take this team moving forward, given the lack of Canadian prospects coming through, given the huge dearth in numbers we see based on the report, this team will be 20.7 on average here. And that's not good, because you're looking at other teams like the USA, for example, who are already in their own process of refreshing their squad with the likes of Sophia Smith and Trinity Rodman. And of course, you've got Japan and England, who have players who are on the younger spectrum, who are yet to hit their peak and will most likely be just about to or right in the middle of their peaks come the next World Cup, and will still be around come eventually the World Cup after that in 2031. So that's going to be a huge amount of ground to cover by Canada, which hopefully by the time their league comes around 2025, they will have covered some of that ground. But I'm not going to hold my breath because we're not too sure what is going to come of it, unfortunately. So it's just guessing from this point forward. But other than that, looking at the statistics, it definitely does show that there is something that needs to be done in Canada to address the lack of players that are currently falling by the wayside. And just to put it to one side for now, we now go to Colombia, who, instead of a lost generation, they are now going to be facing the prospect of having a gold rush of quality players. Now, CONMEBOL, the federation that Colombia belongs to, that features the likes also of Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, etc., they currently have the second lowest proportion of female footballers in organized football at a rate of 5.5%. And in that 5.5%, it is Colombia who are leading the way in player registrations, and they've even seen a jump in players from youth to senior level, as you can see with the stats on the screen right now. As when it comes to players below the age of 20, they start off with 10,284, and then when those players go from youth to senior football, the number bumps up by 5,000 to 15,793, which suggests a positive growth in the number of players who join in and play women's football on a professional level in Colombia, which is a very good and positive sign to see, especially since they are the leaders in this metric. Now, looking at Colombia and CONMEBOL in general, there is a strong push for women's football to grow in the region, which would suggest that there's also that gold rush that I'm talking about in players of elite quality and personnel also who will be helping to guide those players to mold them into the elite players that they're meant to be. That is going to come just from CONMEBOL alone, with obviously Colombia leading the way. Now, in this kind of a situation, it's very important that strong leadership and direction be taken in order to establish the strong position that CONMEBOL finds itself in pretty much just player development and growth from South America, to make sure that it doesn't fall victim to the same shortfalls that on the men's side they have suffered. Because if you look at CONMEBOL on the men's side of things, they really do suffer from maintaining and retaining a certain level of elite standard for their players that encourages them to stay longer so that they can get bigger fees out of their players, and essentially they gamble their long-term livelihoods and prospects in their footballing region on either individuals who shine on a huge level or shine above the rest, like Endrick and Enzo Fernandez, who then get sold to bigger clubs for big fees, and that they can then essentially live off as the clubs that develop the player, or they just need to be well established enough to compete for massive silverware. And that's not a sustainable model, as so many teams in the men's side have just fallen by the wayside in CONMEBOL. So hopefully, with that better direction and with the lessons from history, the women's side of CONMEBOL can actually take advantage and use this as an opportunity to establish a stronghold for themselves going forward, especially in the women's game, as different regions are now beginning to rapidly expand and professionalize their respective women's leagues and associations. Just take UEFA, for example, who have pretty much just mushroomed out of nowhere from being a participant to a leader in the development and growth of women's football on a global level. Now, combining these two things together, Colombia and Canada, there is a huge opportunity for both of these nations to benefit from, which will serve to also benefit women's football. And why do I say this? It's simply because there is a lot of talent coming out of these two countries respectively, but there's not enough opportunities going around to make sure that that talent is nurtured and just exploited for it to blow up and these players to become the world-class caliber of athletes and performers that they're meant to be. And this is where the rest of women's football needs to come in and pretty much help these countries in developing their stars of the future for both the gain of those respective clubs involved and for the gain of these two nations. Now, looking at the two federations that we've mentioned so far, CONCACAF and CONMEBOL, right now, according to the FIFA report, they make up a total of 9% of the overall representation of football clubs across the world, whilst the two biggest contributors are UEFA and AFC, the Asian Football Confederation here, which make up a combined 81%. Now, given the huge swell of talent in both Colombia and Canada, I think that if done right, of course, it is imperative that both UEFA and AFC avail their resources to these two countries in particular, because UEFA and AFC, they possess the best resources and opportunities for both Canadian and Colombian players to grow in terms of just their individual development as players and also as just people, because exposure is important, especially in the global village that we're living in now. at the best and most elite clubs and leagues through the likes of scholarship programs, or of course club takeovers slash absorptions or satellite clubs, whatever you want to call it. Now, looking at the very first situation here, we have scholarship programs. Now, this is something that I think should be taken on a national level and not on just a single club level, because that would give an unfair advantage to that single club that's pursuing that. So I think if it's going to be something that's done, it should be done by the federation. So it should be federation to federation. Like, for example, the Colombian Federation gets into collaboration with the J League, so the Japanese Federation of Football, and you pretty much establish a system of scholarships that can see the foreign leagues in Japan, so like the J League, for example, they can take a punt on either a select few players or just one player or whatever they feel is comfortable, that they can take on an excursion for an extended period of time. We can say 1 season, 2 seasons, or a couple of months, depending on what they feel is best, so that this player can have the necessary exposure, right, to grow and to learn from the respective club that they will be at in the J League, for example, learn how they think about football, learn how they operate on their fundamentals of football, how they develop their players. And again, what it will also help with is gaining more eyes on that player. For all we know, the club that is currently hosting that player, they can decide this player is good enough for us to sign them on a permanent basis, which is what you're trying to cultivate here in this situation for both Colombia and Canada. Now, if the excursion is successful, the foster club, like I've said, they can sign the player on a permanent basis. In my opinion, it should be something where it is a free transfer, but of course you pay the necessary dividends or compensation to the club that raised that player from either Colombia or Canada. And of course, you can, if you want to say no to that, you can then just say, okay, you can just pay us future fee transfers every time they transfer. So that could be something that's organized. That nitty-gritty aspect of the contracts can be discussed by the different federations so that both people benefit, because in such a situation like that, the player benefits by getting exposed to different types of football and potentially getting signed on to a bigger club that can lead to bigger success outside of their home nation. Because as good as Colombia and Canada are on a national level, it's not necessarily reflective of the quality of their league systems. I mean, Canada themselves, they don't even have a league system to begin with. So it'll be good for the player to go to more well-established leagues where they can earn more and be recognized more and just get the most out of their talents and their career. So that's how the player can benefit from this. The two clubs involved can benefit because the club that is the player's initial home, whether it be in Colombia or Canada, they know that they have a good gem on their hands, and if that gem proves to do good when they're on their scholarship program, it can easily be a situation where they know that they're going to get paid either instantly in compensation, or they can have that clause inserted into the player's contract where they get paid every time the player moves clubs. So they're going to win from a financial standpoint and from a reputation standpoint, because now if they produce a certain player who decides to just not who decides, but who goes on to become better and better, they will gain a reputation as being the club that raised this player, and that will raise their reputation in the global game, as clubs from other parts of the world will now want to come to them to see if they can get talent from there, which will help sustain that club from a financial standpoint, and to also continue to encourage that club to continue to invest in women's football and to just continue to go out there and to look for the next best talents so that they can have a chance at success in the global game here. So it is pretty much a win-win for everyone, and it's pretty much a self-sustaining model if done right. Of course, like I said, the shortfalls that the men's side faced when it came to the CONMEBOL and how they handled their player development, etc., that should be something that is obviously looked at with a lot of intent by the women's side to make sure that it doesn't happen. It has to be a sustainable model where you don't sell all your best players at once. You just release them like at a very good level and rate to make sure that everyone is getting a fair shake and a fair chance to let their talents be seen by bigger clubs, and you just take it from there. So I think that could be something that works, especially for a country like Colombia in the CONMEBOL. And then when it comes to the issue of satellite clubs or feeder clubs or whatever you want to call them, I think this is more suited towards Canada. And I say this because right now, in the year and few months that there is no Canadian league system, I think this is the best moment for a major club that is well renowned in player development, like Benfica, for example, who have already done this in the United States for the men's side of football. They should establish either an academy or a satellite club in Canada for their women's team, because what this will do is essentially give them unprecedented and uninterrupted access to the hundreds of thousands of players who are currently falling by the wayside. For all we know, in these 2 years that there is no Canadian football league or whatever it's going to be called, there are going to be a lot of Chloe Lacasses, Jordan Hitemas, Christine Sinclair's, and Ashley Lawrence Regions, who are just going to be falling by the wayside, who can easily be picked up for nothing, literally nothing, by these elite clubs like Benfica, that can then be nurtured on home soil before they eventually go to the respective clubs or associations of those other clubs. In a situation like Manchester City, as we all know, City Football Group, they are a conglomerate of different clubs. Manchester City sitting at the top, and you got the likes of Girona at the bottom, etc., etc. That can be something that should be looked at, in my opinion, by these elite clubs, where you just establish these academies or satellite stations in Canada particularly, and you take advantage of this situation, because much like it will benefit from the scholarship programs, for example in Colombia, this will benefit Canada in the sense that they now have a way of ensuring that the talent does not all just fall to the wayside, essentially, right? And it becomes a situation where the Canadian Federation can even get involved and incentivize these clubs to continue what they're doing, and to even purchase franchises, for all we know, to help with the Canadian League come 2025. This is something that could potentially be just changing. Like it could just change the exact and current foundations of women's football as we know it, as it is. And it's very exciting to think about, because again, just like with the situation concerning the scholarships, everybody benefits, because regardless of the approach that's taken, everyone stands to gain, as the players now have a clear path to become a professional. They go to this academy or to the satellite club, and if the main club, for example Benfica, that we've been using so far, does not think that they're worth it, or they can make the cut there in Lisbon, they can easily then just say, okay, sorry, you're not for us, but what we'll do, we'll keep you at our satellite academy and we'll put you up for transfer. Maybe there'll be another team somewhere in the world that takes a punt on you, and that's always good. And even if it doesn't work out that way, if a player gets released, they have the necessary experience and exposure to learn football from an elite club, which they can definitely use to then trial at another club and potentially get themselves a lucrative contract. So the opportunities are endless here, because apart from what I've just mentioned with the players and how they can benefit, the feeder or satellite clubs and academies will benefit from the resources provided by the club that is pretty much representing these satellites, or the group that's representing these satellites, because they'll have access to cutting edge technology, the best nutritionists, physios, coaches, and other resources that can help in improving player development and growth. And of course, the clubs themselves, like I said before, they will have easier access to top talent. it is again a win-win-win situation for everyone involved, especially if it's done right. So there is a lot of exciting times ahead for women's football in general, but particularly for Colombia and Canada. I do think that they are the two nations that are on the precipice of something huge, and I feel like if everything falls into place and they play their cards right, they will be the leaders of the next generation or the next few generations of elite and world-class footballers. In the case of Canada, you already have Jordan Haitema, who, even though it seems like she's been around for forever, she's only 22 years of age, and she just is a shining example of what can come out of Canada with the right amount of development and interest taken in young players from a very young age. And of course, for Colombia, just looking at their recent World Cup exploits in Australia and New Zealand, you have the likes of Linda Caicedo, who just inspired and lit up the imagination of the millions of viewers across the world and in that stadium, which again also goes to show the level of talent that is pretty much pulsating from both Canada and Colombia respectively. And if everything again falls right into place and is done correctly and ethically, I do believe that these two nations have what it takes to become the leaders for the next few generations and even overtake the likes of the USA if everything goes according to plan. But at the end of the day, and at the end of this very long video, they do sound like the ramblings of a mad scientist, if not a fool. Again, it all comes back to my love for Football Manager, and I think that just deploying something like this, it just has the opportunity to just break women's football as we know it, in a good way of course, and just pretty much provide a blueprint that other nations can follow in order to improve their standing in the women's game. But as always, what do you think of this video? What do you think of the things that I mentioned in it? What are your own opinions and thoughts on the FIFA report? Do you think that the nations that we talked about today have what it takes to actually overtake the likes of the United States? Do you think that this plan is solid enough to make things work for these two nations, or are they just a fool's dream? You let me know in the comments. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.